My name is Jessica Antonia Casillas Scott. I am going into my second year as a PhD student in the history department. I previously got my MFA in the studio arts department at UMass in 2022 and then transferred into the history department as a PhD student. I'm not a steward, but I've been a steward in the history department this past year, and prior to that I was a steward in the studio art department as well. And now I'm on the bargaining committee for GEO. I came to UMass Amherst because after living in New York City as a freelance artist for 20 years, I could no longer afford the cost of living there. And I was looking for a compelling reason to still be involved in the arts, but also to find a higher quality of life. So I came to UMass Amherst. Pioneer Valley at that time was affordable compared to New York City. And that was in 2019 that I moved here. Truly, the health insurance is what made the difference for me in being able to accept the 10-hour contract that the studio arts department offered me. So in the 4+ years that I've lived here, the cost of living has risen to basically Brooklyn standards. I pay Brooklyn level rates for a room in Pelham, and I am in the middle. I'm experiencing some housing insecurity where I have to find a new place to live, but me and my housemate are no longer able to find a place to live that we can afford on the 20-hour contract because the cost of living in the Valley has skyrocketed in the last 2 years alone. So the circumstances in 2019 under which I was able to accept a position at UMass as a grad student no longer exist, and I'm struggling to actually be able to now afford it, even though I'm on a higher contract in the history department. So what that's meant for bargaining is that after the issue survey was circulated in fall 2022 into spring 2023, we found that the biggest place where people were struggling was in housing costs. I think it was 86% of graduate students at UMass are rent burdened, which means they pay over a third of their income. That can be a combined income from GEO positions or UMass positions and outside work, but they pay a third of that or more in their housing for housing. So at that point, I still had an active lease with my landlord when we were getting sort of these statistics in that all the graduate students were struggling with cost of living. In July, I was informed that I would need to move in 6 weeks by my landlord. And what we've encountered since then is a lack of inventory across the board. Just there aren't many places to rent. And of those, none of them are affordable. And of those that are even unaffordable, there are extremely predatory landlords, property managers, and brokers out there who are springing extra fees on us. So we think we'll come to a deal. This has happened twice in the last 3 weeks. We think we'll be ready to sign a lease, and there will suddenly be an extra $2,000 fee added on to that. So that's happened twice, and I think that is that kind of really just ghoulish, greedy behavior on the part of these people with property is encouraged by the property's scarcity, the housing scarcity that's manufactured by UMass Amherst itself, in that it over-enrolls students, that then puts pressure on an already limited housing market to supply housing. It over-enrolls undergraduates, and it knowingly does so. So you're talking about undergraduates who may still have the support of their parents, may not completely understand the housing ecology to which they're now being introduced into, and the impact it has on graduate students with fewer resources and possibly more expenses. We have kids, we have medical debt, we have undergraduate debt. So I just think that the university plays an outsized role on the larger market in the Pioneer Valley for housing. Because we saw that the primary issue with affordability in the Valley was housing, we decided to add a housing stipend as part of our overall pay increase proposal for the new contract. A housing stipend addresses the need directly, not only in name, but in an unrestricted $400 a month that goes to every student with a GEO contract. So if you're on a 5-hour contract, you get $400 a month. If you're on a 10-hour, you get $400 a month. If you're an international student who can't find work over 20 hours a week over the school semester, you still get $400 a month. It also supplements your summer income by allowing you to, have one, frankly. It's so difficult to find work in the Valley over the summer. And again, international students are under different kinds of federal constraints that domestic students aren't. So this just is a blanket of money that can be used towards your housing costs in the form of a stipend that will make a critical difference in moving those 86% of students out of the financially burdened category that they have indicated they're in via the issue survey. So that's why the housing stipend is I think, necessary for us rather than a percentage increase. We are also asking for a 15% increase on the base wage, but that will impact students disproportionately based on their hourly income, right? So those 5-hour students, the 5-hour contract students aren't going to get as much as a bump as a 20-hour student is, which is again why the housing stipend is critical for our most vulnerable students. And so you can get kind of mired down in the numbers when you're talking about costs of housing and cost of living in the Valley, but really what it comes down is to making a UMass education accessible. And there are a number of issues and barriers to accessibility. When you can't afford housing, that probably means you're having issues finding food. UMass admin is fond of saying that our tuition waiver is an income, but you can't buy food on a tuition waiver. You can't pay your rent on a tuition waiver. It all comes down to basic accessibility, which is not an economic issue. I mean, frequently accessibility can be improved by having a higher wage, but there are issues with accessible healthcare. Like if you have a chronic illness, for example, the overburdened sort of bureaucratic processes that you have to go through to get your reimbursements from the UHS health system and our health plan in general becomes an issue of having the dedicated time to be able to see that paperwork through, because the understaffing at the university means that you can't always rely on the admin to push that paperwork through for you in a timely manner. So that's one bottleneck, and that creates inaccessibility for students with different needs. We've talked about accessibility in terms of just physical accessibility on campus and the bottleneck in staffing for disability services, where you have 6 or more weeks go by into a student's semester where they can't get into a classroom or their workplace, or they don't have a workplace assigned to them that has a bathroom within a 15-minute walk of it. So they hold their bladder for 4 hours at a time when they're teaching discussion sections. So accessibility isn't just an economic issue, it's an issue of safety in the workplace, and it's an issue of dignity in the workplace. Accessibility.